Good morning, everyone. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about zooxanthellae, why it's so important, what it does for our environment, Earth, and marketplace, as well as why we should care so much about it. Now, to first understand what the zooxanthellae are, we need to understand where they are. So, zooxanthellae are going to be found in every single coral reef known to mankind. It stretches from the Suez Canal all the way to Australia and back to the Caribbean Sea. So, pretty much every single coral reef you can think of, they're going to be there. Now, the real importance of these creatures plays out when we understand what they do for the corals, as well as how they interact with and supply the corals in sort of a symbiotic relationship. Now, you don't really typically see these creatures as they're so small, but the impacts they have are seen in pretty much every single aspect of the tropical marine sense of reefs and the environments around them. So, what are the zooxanthellae? The zooxanthellae are a very small dinoflagellate, although sometimes they can be diatoms. They're typically around the size of 20 microns. They live in these coral apartments. So it's these cells that are outside on the gastroderm. They're connected to the mesoglia, and they kind of hover in between the cytoplasm of the external and internal layers of the coral polyp itself. Now, they form a symbiotic relationship with the coral hosts. They produce food through photosynthesis that the animal can actually take in, the animal being the coral itself, that would otherwise consider them to be heterotrophic. They couldn't produce their own food, so they have these autotrophic zooxanthellae that live inside of them, and they'll act as sort of the food powerhouse for the animal itself. So they're dinoflagellates, as you know. They're 20 microns in size. And now, at the start of the research, which was occurring in the 90s and the early 2000s, they were originally all thought to be from Symbiodinium microdactylium, which is just one species. But as there's been more taxonomic reclassifications through microscopes and other methods of research, we found a wider variety of the Symbiodinium genus as well as the Zooxanthellae name. So it used to encompass just this general group of algae that provided a benefit to the corals, but as we've researched further, we've discovered that they're not all just dinoflagellates. There's many different shapes and sizes of these zooxanthellae that can have a lot of benefits for the coral. So zooxanthellae can inhabit soft corals as well as stony corals. And for those of you unfamiliar with the types of corals, the soft corals are going to be the more tentacle-like, soft, think more sea anemone, all these stuff that you see in the aquariums pretty much. And then the stony corals are these hard, plate-like, kind of disc-looking shapes, and that's where the morphology starts to take effect. So zooxanthellae, as you know, are photosynthetic, so these stony corals that don't really move too much, they can't actually change their shape depending on the time of day, if it's phototropism, gravitropism, anything like that, they're going to change their body shape to inhabit more zooxanthellae as well as maximize that surface area for the sun. And they're going to live within the phototrophic zone so that these zooxanthellae have a home to live. But at the same time, the more zooxanthellae that a plant animal gets, the more food that they'll receive so they can grow faster and live a healthier lifestyle just because of the way that they're shaped. So, more on the effect of how these zooxanthellae actually affect the corals. As you can see through these kind of little apartment-like cells, the zooxanthellae live in there, and what they do is they'll collect the sunlight and do their whole reaction, give the plant food. But there's different types of zooxanthellae. So there's a direct relationship in the stressors and the resilience, as some types of zooxanthellae are more resistant to temperature changes, some don't need as strict of a phototrophic range for their light to take reactions. And just when you narrow it down and you do a little bit more research, there's different kinds of zooxanthellae, and they can create a resiliency for a certain type of coral in a certain type of area. So if one region of the Great Barrier Reef is struggling a lot with the temperature, if you took a lot of this zooxanthellae that's more resistant to temperature changes, you could see a rebound in these corals from the bleaching and other sort of effects like that, kicking them out when there's too much oxygen. If you appropriated the right kind of zooxanthellae for the area, then you could see a dramatic increase in coral reef well-being. So here's a cool little clip of the phototrophic response. As you can see in this coral, the zooxanthellae that live on those white little flangulas at the end, they'll come out at certain times of the sun to do their photosynthetic activity. And this, again, affects the morphology of how these soft, delicate Corals are coming out of this stony base to protect themselves, but they'll only do it in the certain times of day where the zooxanthellae can actually do their photosynthetic reaction. So now you know the value of the zoos. So now you know the value of the zooxanthellae. Now, that's great and all, but why do they matter? In order to understand the value of the zooxanthellae, you have to understand the value of the reefs. These reefs provide billions of dollars in economic impact, as well as a fishery, a habitat, a tourist spot, and locations for new medicines and the frontiers of science to explore even further. So let's take a look at these reefs and how they financially add up. Now, when you look at just the American property, from national parks to marine sanctuaries to preserves, the raw land value is $3.42 billion, and that's just the land. Nothing in it, not the services it provides, but just the land. That's already a lot of money. Now, when we look at it in an international angle, regions like northwestern Australia, the Coral Triangle countries of Southeast Asia, western Mexico, and countless other small nations who depend on these reefs for fisheries, coastal protection, tourism, and biodiversity, this number is astronomical. The net present value over the next 50 years is $797.4 billion. These reefs are an incredible asset to our entire Earth. Now, dollar bills aside, if we look at the ecosystem services of these reefs, it's invaluable. Reefs provide a habitat for fisheries that give livelihood and nutrition to all locals, natives, tourists, and pretty much everyone else who loves to see a nice coral reef. Structure of these provides shoreline protection against waves, surges, and sea level rises that protect property, homes, and businesses. But when we neglect these reefs, with issues like ocean acidification, elevated sea temperature, the worst occurs. Bleaching of the reefs, growth declines, recruitment of zooxanthellae, and growth declines as well. These reefs are in danger, and they need our help. So now you know just how impactful these coral reefs are to us, and just how impactful the zooxanthellae is to them. We owe a lot of our comfort and livelihood to the zooxanthellae just because of all they can do for the coral reefs and the symbiotic relation they have. However, here's where the frontiers of science come in. A study done in 2006 on the response of zooxanthellae in symbiosis with the Mediterranean corals Cladochora caspitosa and Oculina patagonica in response to elevated temperatures. These corals were exposed from a 24 degrees Celsius to a 32 degrees Celsius increase in a very rapid amount of time as cultures were taken out from the sea, and this was done in a laboratory setting. However, after 1 day back at a resting temperature of 24°C, zooxanthellae in symbiosis with the Mediterranean corals can be found to be resistant to short-term changes in temperature, even well above the maximum temperatures experienced by these corals in the summer. Naturally, further research is needed. However, if we take the time to understand what's going on in the Gulf of Laspisa, which is a little bit south of the northernmost part of Italy in that armpit-looking region, then we can actually take a chance on these corals and prepare them for events like bleaching, temperature increases, as well as many other factors if we simply understand what's driving these zooxanthellae out of the corals before these corals can die off. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.